Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good, lovely, good. I've never been described as an integrating lens before. I'll take that as a compliment. It's very sweet, Jamie. Thank you. And it is really exciting for us to be here. Thank you, Tracy, for inviting us to give all of you a special sneak peek of our first film in our Food Mythbusters series. By the time a few more weeks come by and we officially launch on Food Day, October 24th, I should be able to say Food Mythbusters without getting my tongue tied. But we are really excited to be here and share with you the video in a few minutes and tell you first just a little bit about why I started this project and what I hope we achieve with it. But first, I just wanted to ask, I know I missed, or I hear that I missed a really great farm-to-table dinner last night. Did any of you get to go to this? Yes? Was it fabulous? So I am sorry to have missed it, but I am also curious, how many of you just in the past week or in the past month have eaten local or organic or sustainable food? Raise your hand. Okay, so for those of you who are watching this on a live cast and might not have seen all the hands that went up in the room, pretty much 100% of your hands just went up, which should not be that surprising to any of us here. We are here as people who care about the environment, if we're here at South by Southwest Eco, care about what we put into our bodies. And so if you've raised your hands, and you probably know when you're choosing organic or sustainable food, that means for produce that it means food that's been raised without toxic chemicals, that's been raised without sewage sludge, that wasn't irradiated, that wasn't, we hope, genetically modified. Or if you're eating organic or sustainable meat and dairy, that food was raised without hormones, without antibiotics, on feed that was organic. And there's probably a lot of reasons why each of us in this room just raised our hands and said that that's food we've been choosing for our bodies. But if you've been eating this way, you also might still have a little bit of a kind of lingering doubt in the back of your mind about to what extent is it really practical for the whole world to eat this way? Are we all naive to be thinking that we can really feed the world by raising food organically or sustainably? And as somebody who's been thinking and writing and talking about food for a long time now, since I wrote my first book with my mom 12 years ago, one of the questions that I get more than any other question when I speak to people about food and farming is this question: well, are we really going to be able to feed the world through organic agriculture or through sustainable agriculture? Can we really do it? So I sort of consider that my job today will be done if after this presentation that more of us are convinced, and if more of you feel like you have ways to convince others that it is absolutely possible to feed the world through these farming practices, and in fact, more than just possible, that it is an essential part of being able to feed the future. And I hope my job here up here will be done if you get a sense of how our project, this Food Mythbusters project, can help you build that case, can help you tell that story, as well as other stories about the food that we eat. So I'm going to give you a little bit more of sort of a backstory about how this project came to be and about the film that you're about to see in a few minutes. And then you'll hear a little bit later from one of our organizers from Corporate Accountability. This is very exciting. I rarely use PowerPoints at my presentations, and it feels very, very techy, which is great. Let's see if it works. Aha, there we go. So a little bit of a backstory. I'm curious how many of us are familiar with the research that's been coming out, especially in the past 5 years, that have come to some pretty definitive conclusions about how we best feed the world. These studies, though, are studies that many of us here in the US have never heard about. So, first one, Agriculture at the Crossroads, produced by 400 experts from around the world, a report called the International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge, Science, and Technology for Development, which is quite a mouthful. Did anybody see any reporting about this in the news? Ever heard about it? Its acronym might even be worse than the actual long name. Its acronym is IAASTD, which unless you're actually doing a report about public health, you might not want to put STD into your acronym. But it was a fabulous study. It came out a few years ago. 400 experts from all around the world researched for 4 years the best ways to produce food, the best examples of agricultural production from all around the world, and it was really forward-thinking with this question of how are we going to feed the world? And its conclusion was pretty conclusive. Basically, they said that we absolutely must transition to biological substitutes for agrochemicals to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels in agriculture, and that essentially business as usual is no longer an option. This is the conclusion of this report. It was signed on by 56 or 57 countries, not the United States. In the initial partnership starting the research, a number of petrochemical companies were part of the coalition working on this. They all broke away when it became really clear that the conclusions were going to say that there is little place in the future of farming for agrochemical companies. It was a really important study, and yet I barely saw any reporting about it here in the US. And when I speak to audiences, no one's ever heard about it. Or how about this one? Let's see, we'll do this one next. How about this one from the University of Michigan? Anybody heard about the University of Michigan study from a few years ago that looked at farming systems from all around the world and productivity? Another hugely important study that got very little coverage here. In this study, researchers looked at 300 investigations of productivity on organic and industrial and low-input farms, looking at yield data from these different studies. So across these 300 studies, what did the researchers find? They found that shifting to organic agriculture, especially for farmers in the developing world, was hugely significant and could dramatically increase yields. 2 times, 4 times, 6 times as much food could come off of plots of land with farmers shifting to organic production. And what these researchers found in the end is that if you actually looked at global food supply and were to transition the planet towards sustainable or organic production, that you would not sacrifice levels of yield, that in fact, yes, you could have enough global food supply, in fact, even more than we have today. Or how about this one? Anybody heard any reporting on this study? None of them have quite elegant titles. This was Toward Sustainable Agricultural Systems in the 21st Century. It was published by the National Academies Press in 2010 and contributed to by dozens of experts from around the country. That nobody could dismiss as just kind of hippie organic kale lovers. These are experts who are well researched in their fields of study, looking at agriculture in this country. The conclusion of this study, that if we in the US are to meet the future food needs of this country and beyond, that we absolutely must look at how do our current industrial agricultural systems impact our ability to feed the future. In other words, how are we currently, with industrial agriculture, undermining our ability to feed the future through doing things like draining the underground aquifer that is used in about 1/4 of all farmland in this country. And that at the current rate, if we keep using it as much as we are for industrial agriculture, it will be completely empty in 40 years. So looking at all the ways that industrial agriculture is currently impacting our ability to feed the future, these researchers found that we absolutely must move toward sustainable production. So here are just a handful of studies, and I just mentioned 3. There are many others that I came across that were basically, these conclusions were so decisive that you could call this consensus, that we have a growing global consensus that the way we are going to feed the future is not through toxic chemicals, not through increasingly pumping our animals full of drugs, that it's looking forward to these sustainable pathways. But despite that consensus, what I keep hearing across this country is many people who are saying, but wait, don't we need industrial agriculture to feed the world? How are we going to get the yields we need if we don't have industrial agriculture? And I don't know about all of you in this room, but this is this question that I keep hearing all across the country. So I started wondering, well, if we have scientific consensus on the one hand, and all these studies that are so conclusive, that are so clear, and why is it that so many of us are still so in the dark about this question? And I think that a lot of the answer to that question can be found in looking at the marketing budgets of the companies who are profiting from our continuing use of industrial agriculture practices. And who are those companies? They're the chemical companies. They're the pharmaceutical companies. You know how many drugs are used in factory farms compared to in people? It's the oil industry. It's all of these companies that are benefiting from the status quo. And they've all been engaged for decades in a very deliberate communications campaign to confuse the American public about this core question and get us all having a bit of doubt about whether our love for those farm-to-table dinners that some of you enjoyed last night is just kind of a elitist pastime for the few versus something that is actually essential to feeding the future. And when I talk about big budgets, when I talk about multi-decade campaigns, just to give you a bit of a sense of how big these budgets are, the agricultural biotech giant Monsanto spent just last year $1.1 billion in its advertising and marketing. $1.1 billion of one company's marketing budget. So lobbying, public relations, advertising, funding slanted research, it all is influencing this fundamental narrative about how we think about food in this country. So we see things like ADM tells us it's the supermarket to the world. ADM is Archer Daniels Midland, one of the biggest grain traders in the world. And yet while the company is saying that they're supermarket to the world, it's involved with price-fixing scandals that were so outrageous that they became fodder for, some of you might have seen Matt Damon's fabulous film, The Informant. We see ads like this in The New Yorker, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, asking, how can we squeeze more food from a raindrop? How can we get more food from a raindrop? Advertisements like these from Monsanto, again, one of the world's largest agricultural biotech giants, who is trying to convince us that through genetic engineering, we are going to create seeds that are drought resilient, that are going to be able to squeeze more water from that raindrop. Well, guess what? There is not one commercialized genetically engineered seed in the marketplace today. And yet they launched this mega advertising campaign. We see things like Bayer Crop Science telling us in their sustainability reports that they're helping to feed a hungry planet. That's what we're hearing from Bayer. Some of you might be aware that Bayer is one of the largest suppliers to the livestock industry of antibiotics. And the use of antibiotics in livestock, the prevalence of livestock antibiotics in this country is leading to major public health crises of antibiotic resistance. They're also the maker of a toxic pesticide that's now covering nearly 90% of US corn seeds and is a likely culprit in the colony collapse disorder, otherwise known as the disappearance of bees, right? And it doesn't take, you don't have to be a farmer or even a gardener to know that bees are kind of an essential part of producing abundant food. I know one of my colleagues, Tom Philpott from Mother Jones, is here. He's done some great reporting on this connection between Bayer and colony collapse disorder. So you have on the one hand this company telling us that they're helping to feed the planet, while some of their core products are actually actively undermining our ability to do so. You also have these companies coming together in industry trade groups. So last year there was an announcement of 2 new big industry trade groups, one called the US Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, the other called the Alliance to Feed the Future. And if you look at the materials from the US Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, they like to say that they represent, what do you think they represent from their name? Farmers and ranchers. All kinds, all stripes, from everywhere in the country. You look at who is funding them, who are their industry partners. It's Monsanto, DuPont, and some of the biggest agrochemical giants out there. Alliance to Feed the Future. I'm about feeding the future, right? We're all, who could argue with that? Who makes up the Alliance to Feed the Future? Groups like the American Frozen Food Institute, the Snack Food Association, International Food Additives Council, you know. One of my favorite partners of Alliance to Feed the Future is the Calorie Control Council, which represents the makers of all that fake sugar and fake fat like Olestra and saccharin and all that, right? So I'm thinking, yeah, we're really going to feed the future with Olestra. So you have organizations like this forming to, again, shape what is the story that all of us believe about food. So when I heard that these two organizations were starting, and if you read the industry press, it was really interesting. At the time that they were just kind of gathering steam, these two new initiatives, some of the industry press said that the companies that were coming together were actually coming together to try to talk to the American public about the benefits of modern agriculture, because their minds, they said, were getting pollinated, as in Michael Pollan. You know, too many of us were reading Michael Pollan. We were actually starting to ask questions. You know, too many of us were watching The Matrix that Jamie mentioned, right, and starting to ask about factory farming. Too many of us saw Food Inc. and started asking, you know, why are all these contract farmers being put into these horrible, horrible contracts with Tyson and other companies? Too many of us are starting to ask questions, better form these trade associations. So last year, I decided, sort of inspired by these two groups forming, to try to do something with partners and allies and colleagues in the food movement to create a set of tools that we all could have, we all could use to help tell the real story about our food, to challenge this kind of myth-making about our food. So we created Food Mythbusters and brought together a coalition of these organizations, including Food and Water Watch, Real Food Challenge. Grace is one of our coalition members, and have brought on, in addition to this coalition, dozens and dozens and dozens of partners from around the country. And we are creating a series of films, so you'll see, you're the first audience to see the first one, of short films that we're producing with Free Range Studios, who did The Matrix, and with mentorship and advice from Annie Leonard, who hopefully you all will get a chance to hear tomorrow because she's fabulous. And she did the story of Stuff with Free Range. And we're also sort of creating films, doing webinars on these topics, created a website that will be up on Food Day, and hosting events all around the country. So you'll hear a little bit more about the project in a second, but when I bring Jamie up from Corporate Accountability. But we will, right now, we'll screen the short film for all of you. It is slightly painful to watch myself on screen. I might duck out for a moment, but we'll screen the short film for you. And then Jamie will come up, and then we'll have time for questions and conversation after you hear a little bit more from Jamie.